Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined once again by Jeff Robinson and Ed Pye. Guys, we are now officially in the international window for men's test matches this year, and Canada began their European tour against Romania. We said in the episode prior that this is definitely a game where Canada could get into the thick of it, which in hindsight seems a bit optimistic. At one point, 12-0 down just by conceding penalties within their own half, made it 12-7 at half time, and then the floodgates opened mainly because of offences committed by Canada. The final score, Romania 31, Canada 21. So there were a few tries picked up. So Mason Flesch got that try that gave Canada the 7 points to have them 12-7 at half time. In the second half, we had Von Dadelson getting his and Waddle getting his try on debut. Nelson, pretty impressive from the boot, getting 3 out of 3 conversions. But two other things that were picked up in the game was yellow cards. One for Robbie Povey and one for Matt Tierney. And I think just far too many penalties, even without a card offense. And credit to Romania, they were spectacular. Their scrum half, especially, who was also on kicking duties, was doing very well. And ultimately, it was the penalty count which just came back to cost Canada in the end, because there's only so Romania scored, I believe, 4 tries, and 2 of those came following yellow card offenses. So if you take into account that, if Canada had just kept their discipline, not only would they have had 2 tries potentially not go against them, but at the very least, 4 penalties not go against them either. So, this is a game that we could say that, Canada would have won if they hadn't been their own biggest enemy. But yeah, well, that's my impression. Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you. What did you make of this match?
Well, you actually also haven't mentioned Nick, I believe it was Nick Ben's disallowed try. I would think it would have
Yeah.
made it 14-12, where Kelly got called on a pick. A bit of a rough call. It may have been the correct one. I'd have to rewatch it, but yeah, I mean that was early second half, I believe, and gave Canada a chance. That would have given Canada a chance to get back in it. Definitely, though, the penalty count is too high. Set pieces also can. That's part of the penalty count. If Canada can just, I think, get a scrum going where they can, 90%, 95% win their own ball, and when it's their put in and when they're on the defensive scrum, not give away a penalty, that would go a long way to helping Canada stay competitive and in these games. And I'm not going to single out any player for that because that's a forward pack overall issue. But definitely, I hope there's a way that the coaches can get a system going where our 8-man scrum can at least get parity.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment to look at this. Ed, were there any stats that stood out from this game? Because one of the things that Stephen Meehan was saying post-match was, yes, they played poorly in the first quarter, but there's a good indication of hard work, and there are areas that they've got to keep working on, because there's a basis of a good game and a good team here. What did you find that can maybe add some silver lining to this game?
Yeah, so I think these two teams, based on history and based on world rankings, it should be a pretty good matchup between these two teams. I think out of the last 5 games, Romania's won 4-1. So at least Canada's got a victory in there. But, based on where they stand in international rugby, the rankings and, their history in the game, this should be a pretty good rivalry, the North American versus Europe rivalry there. And it was actually a pretty even game overall. Canada actually slightly edged territory in possession. There's only a couple of percentage points in that. In terms of entries into the 22, Canada and Romania pretty similar there. So they created the same amount of attacking opportunities. Canada, came away with tries as well. Um, the scrum, 67% win rate in the scrum. So I think they really missed Kelly Martinez there. He makes a difference in the scrum. He's turning out to be one of Canada's better scrummagers. So they missed him in this game. Um, the question there is, does Canada have the depth to consistently perform? If you're switching one player out and then you're starting to lose your scrum battle, that's something that the coaches need to look at and start building more depth there. Um, Quite a few penalties in the game. I mean, we talked about Canada's penalty count, giving away those two yellows being pretty catastrophic for them. Going down 12-0 early in the game is pretty tough to come back from. There was 23 penalties in overall in the game. There was 12-11 against Canada. So the penalties actually evened out a little bit, but when you are committing yellow card offences and losing players for 20 minutes of the match, that's just a killer in international rugby. Good sides will capitalize on that and put points on you. And when they're giving away those penalties at the beginning of the first half and going down 12-0, that's not going to help. Um, One other question I kind of wrote down here when thinking about player performance, do we think that players not having jobs at the moment because their MLR teams are dropping out of the competition is affecting their player performance? Someone like Robbie Povey, who has now lost his team, that's got to affect you somewhat in your performance in terms of, worrying about the future, maybe having to deal with contract negotiations and things like that. I don't know how much of that played an effect, but Robbie Povey was one of the players that got carded there, so not his best performance, and maybe it is weighing on his mind. So, there was just things that, a good performance when you look at it in perspective and compare the stats, but
Mm.
just a few things that let them down there.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern to have. And, Jeff and I were talking on last episode of the concern that a lot of Canadian players are now taking the time to assess their future, assess the feasibility of continuing to play professional rugby as a whole, never mind test rugby. And, you know, it's a question that a lot of players have all over the world is like, how long can I keep playing this, especially in an environment when professionalism is more and more demanding of what I need to do. I can't have like a second job on the side. I need to give all my focus to this. But at the same time, is it supporting me financially enough that I can take care of my family, take care of myself? And even if you have the opportunity to then play overseas at this point, I know that you mentioned Cali Martinez. He's one of the few Canadians that have been confirmed to be in MLR next year. He's re-signed with the Flags of Old Glory DC. But obviously, not everyone can pack up their bags and fly to Europe or fly to New Zealand or Australia and say, yeah, I'm going to apply my trade here and hope that the experiences I have gives me the opportunity to play at an international level. Because realistically, the best that a lot of these guys can do is probably like the Pro D2 and then it's more likely National League One or the champ in England or the smaller clubs in New Zealand and Australia. And as such, you're now in a position where you're already on the back foot of what your capabilities are. Because if you're not in a fully professional environment like Super Rugby or the Premiership or the top 14, there's already three, four, five national squads that are definitely at a level higher than you. And I mean, we do have Canadian players already in the top 14. We have Tyler Ardron, Evan Olmsted, but these are guys that are, approaching the end of their career. Tyler Ardron said if Canada hadn't qualified for the World Cup, this would be his final season of professional rugby. But, opportunities are becoming harder and harder, and national requirements are saying that you need to have X amount of players that are domestically qualified, and you're competing with other capped into like retired All Blacks or retired Springboks and stuff for your place, and it's getting even harder for the Canadians out there. I know in the last episode we talked about what is the opportunity for Canadian players going forward if MLR is closing up shop and reducing the number of international players available. Never mind the fewer clubs than last season. And I think, for some people, it's going to be a time where they say, I only have a limited window to apply myself. Otherwise, I have to hang up the boots and call it a day. And yeah, sorry, that has gone off on a bit of a tangent of player availability and the existential crisis of finding opportunities. But I think that's something that is weighing not only on guys like Rob Povey, but the majority of the Canadian side at this moment. But speaking of the side that's out there and is now gearing up for the rest of their tour, I think something we have to keep in mind, and take off the rose-tinted glasses I've had for the past couple of episodes, is that Stephen Meehan's been in this job for less than a year, and he had two very clearly defined objectives. One, qualify for the Men's Rugby World Cup. All right, that's done. Two, develop the squad. And that's what he's currently doing at the moment. And we've seen the schedule they have. It's 3 games, 3 weekends of a distance that covers multiple time zones. And he is saying that this is a good example of the demands of a professional rugby player when it comes to the World Cup, especially if it's going to be in Australia and Canada, say, has a game in Perth one round and then has a game in Sydney or Melbourne a week later. They need to be able to adapt to traveling those distances. And the reality is that if you have to train guys to get to that position, it means that you're going to make some mistakes along the way. Some players are going to be up for the task. Some players need to adapt to it, and and I think it is disappointing. I think that the penalty count obviously was the biggest enemy for uh, Canada this weekend. And the next game they've got is probably the toughest they are going to have this entire tour, which is going to be against Georgia. And that's going to be an even earlier kickoff for us, which, that's the most tiring thing for us is just waking up a couple of hours earlier to be able to watch that game. But I think once these dates and opponents came out, we collectively agreed of like, this is going to be a damage control kind of game coming up. This one, I think that, trying to see both sides of the coin, the negative, obviously, this was a game that they could win. The positive being that if they can work on their penalty count and lower that if they can work on their discipline overall. I've got to agree with Meehan here. There is the bones of a good team underneath those yellow cards, and I think they've just got to get their heads straight, and they'll be able to get a good score, probably against Portugal. And I think at most, what we can hope for is a respectable performance against Georgia. And yeah, I'll just leave it over to you guys. Ed, any final thoughts from this round?
Yeah, I mean, I did miss one stat there that 13 of the players of the 23 had turnovers in the game, which is simply not good enough. If you're turning the ball over 13 of your team are turning the ball over. What are you living on? Like how are you actually able to keep consistency in your gameplay if you're turning that amount of ball over? I hope they give Georgia a good challenge. I'm not sure how Georgia's going to approach the game. Are they going to put out their best squad? Are they looking to build through this series as well? It'll be interesting to see what they do. But
Mhm.
if Canada can keep it within a two-score game, I think that's a good goal for them.
And Jeff, what are your thoughts?
I'd be very happy if it's the same score line at the end of at the end of the Georgia game, like it was against Romania. I would consider that a positive outcome. Hmm.
No, I absolutely get that. Interestingly enough, Georgia, they played against the United States this weekend. The US, after their drubbing against Scotland, this was a much closer affair than I think a lot of people predicted. Georgia did come out winners, 43 to 30. They will face Canada 7 a.m. Eastern time. That's a eye-watering 4 a.m. on the Pacific coast. But the following week, they are up against Japan. And if Georgia is on the cusp of becoming a tier one nation, then Japan is securely in that. So, to follow up to what you said, Ed, I think Georgia may be eyeing this game as a rest weekend for their first 15. They want those guys healthy and ready to go against Japan, and they may be given the opportunities to less experience and fewer capped players this game. Again, I'm saying that knowing full well that Georgia is probably still going to win this weekend. But again, I think damage limitation is the name of the game. A respectable score is what we're looking for, even if it's only a 60-minute performance before Canada fall off the edge, then I think that'll be perfectly fine by me. And then the focus will then turn to Portugal. So set your alarms early for that Saturday because, oh boy, it's going to be an interesting one to say the least. And speaking of Rob Povey and his team, it was announced over this past week that the Utah Warriors have withdrawn from Major League Rugby and will be ceasing operations as the professional outlet. They have indicated they still aim to be involved in the rugby community in Utah, just not in Major League Rugby. And the off-season from hell goes from bad to worse to somehow even worse for Major League Rugby, as they are now down to 6 teams. I'm sure that will help the planning stage for games and hopefully not as many buys as previous years, but unfortunately, not as many rounds, not as many games. And at this point, are we just going to put everyone into the playoffs and just go from there? Or are they going to be condensing it down? Is it only going to be the top 4 teams or the top 2 teams? I I'm glad I'm not a member of the MLR front office. Let me just put it like that. But as I say, opportunities for Canadian players are becoming fewer and fewer. At least Cali Martinez has his position with Old Glory DC, and Lucas Rumble, it has also been announced, will return to the Chicago Hounds for 2026.
There are still rumors about the California Legion. I still put it like 50-50 there'll be an MLR season next year. I'm not convinced.
Hmm.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I hope I'm wrong. Don't get me wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but there are still rumors about the Legion not going to be able to make it. Yeah.
Mm.
There was a good report that the Goff report, which you guys probably read, put an article out just last week talking about how the league needs to restructure in order to figure out these problems. Because one of the big issues is the amount of player payments that have come in. So, teams the owners looking to outdo each other in terms of getting in international players and then
Mm.
skirting around the rules in terms of how you're able to actually contract those players, giving out F45 gyms and all of the different
Mm.
ways that a lot of professional sports leagues owners actually try and get around the rules. But
Mm.
they had some interesting ideas on bringing it back to a league that serves the US, and then potentially, that might actually help Canada in terms of, limiting it more so to players within North America, as part of the league rather than being all flashy and bringing in a bunch of players from, big names who people don't really recognize in North America, and more so building teams around players from certain areas and building up a local fan base rather than a fan base that's just coming because there's a lot of pomp and circumstance and flash around it. So that's an interesting report if anybody wants to check it out.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, I think that that would be not. I've seen a rugby player from Utah basically echo the same thoughts as was in the report, as you just mentioned, Ed, of that teams are spending huge sums of money to get international players that, respectfully, the local fan base didn't fully know who they were. Uh, and the cost of that was underpaying some of the more domestic talent available. It's yeah, it's interesting to see, but again, Jeff, I kind of agree. I think it's still 50-50 on whether MLR 2026 goes ahead. I hope it does,
Me
but
too.
I'm not crossing my fingers at this point. And well, that's I don't want to end on a negative tone. So let's talk about something positive. And over the past few weeks, we've been having the USports Women's Rugby Championship. It finally came down to the defending champions UBC up against UVic for the final. And whilst this fixture is, very common for the Canadian Universities Men's Rugby Championship, this is the first final to feature both these teams. So the Thunderbirds and the Vikes in women's rugby. I think so. That's pretty interesting. Also interesting is that last year, uh, it was UBC's first women's rugby championship, and this has been going on for multiple decades now. So, so yeah, huge congratulations to UBC on not only winning last year, but a stunning victory this time, this time around, as they defended their title. So consecutive victories. It was incredibly close, with UBC trailing 13-10 at one point before getting the try that set them above and then holding that defense right to the end to retain their title. Commiserations to UVic, but fantastic outpouring from these two teams. And now that we've had the UBC women, sorry, not the UBC Women's Rugby Championship, it's just now they've won it back to back. Maybe they should put their name on the title and be the official sponsors. After the U Sports Women's Rugby Championship, we now have the Canadian Universities Men's Rugby Championship coming up beginning this week on November 12th. I believe the games are going to be streamed live. They've previously been shown on the Rugby Network. I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be continuing. But we will keep you up to date with that on our social media channels. And if you would like to watch any other rugby games this coming weekend, they are going to be available on TSN for the Canadian games and on DAZN for the other men's international rugby games. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out more, as well as our written pieces on our website, therougerugby.ca. You can also find our podcast on Spotify and YouTube at The Rouge Rugby, and we're available across social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and Blue Sky, all at The Rouge Rugby. Jeff, Ed, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on X at WP Rugby Jeff.
Yeah, and you can find me on YouTube and Facebook, Rugby101_25.
And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, that's where we're going to end this episode. Jeff, Ed, thank you for joining me, and thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.